That's what Henry said this morning. I don't know if I'm going somewhere or.
I'm sorry, I forgot to announce Stacy Martin's mother passed away yesterday.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Right. Stacy Martin's mother, who Stacy Martin, most everybody knows, used to attend here years ago. Her mother passed away yesterday. So remember her and that family. They've been through a lot lately. Yeah, Jimmy had his, I guess, heart attack. Is he doing all right? Good. Jimmy's young, too, to be having a heart attack. All right, so any time that in any study, when we get close to the end, I'm ready for it to be done. I hope that you don't feel that way, but I do. I just start getting anxious about doing something different. And I've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed having a different kind of study rather than what I usually put together everything and PowerPoint and all of that, and I enjoy that. It's a whole lot of work, and sometimes the class kind of flies by and I'm at it again. So this has been nice to be able to look at a book, and I'm thinking about doing that again. Just want to get your opinion on that. This is next to last lesson. We've got one more lesson. And so I'm thinking about Dan Winkler's book, Be Attitudes. And just looking at that, it looks really, really good, and it is hands-on and also a lot, involves a lot of discussion and everything, and everybody to have a book. Would y'all be interested in that? Yes. Raise your hand if you're interested in that. Fantastic. All right, well, that's what we'll do then. Good to hear. All right, so what we are at is lesson 11, forgiving God, number 2. Somebody tell me about forgiving God. What does that mean?
If you blame God for something in your heart, even though it's not.
Okay, blaming God for some catastrophe or something that has happened in your life, even though it's not his fault. Sometimes we think, well, God, why didn't you do something about that? So that's what, of course, he's talking about. Last week, we started talking about this, and God allows suffering. He mentions 2 different main reasons. Why does God allow suffering? Anybody?
It helps make
Remember?
us stronger.
Okay, it helps make us stronger. So 3. We'll say 3 then, because that's not the 2 I've got in mind that he went over. So it makes us stronger, but it makes us stronger. Why?
It strengthens our faith.
Okay, it strengthens, that's what he's saying. So it strengthens our faith, makes us stronger, but why is that? How does that happen? We get stronger because
We trust in God.
we're trusting in God, growing closer to God. So that's one thing that he talks about. And in that, let's see, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, 7 through 10 is the main passage where he talks about that. And of course, the Apostle Paul is talking about that in weakness he becomes strong because, of course, of his dependency on God. What's another reason, another way that catastrophe helps us and suffering helps us? Anybody that we talked about last week? Discipline. Well, yeah, that having to do with God disciplining those whom he loves, the Hebrews 11 passage. And so that really had to do with the reason why oftentimes we suffer, that God allows the suffering, is he is allowing us to get stronger. He's helping us to get stronger. That's what that passage is talking about. Thank you, Nancy.
Mark,
Yes.
there's a lady that lives down the road from us here about half a mile. Used to be she is a member here. She used to be faithful, coming back years ago, and her son got killed, hit some black ice on the road, and she ain't been since then. She blames God for her son getting killed.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not uncommon.
I spent a lot of time talking to her, but didn't do no good.
Yeah, oftentimes we will blame God because in our pain and suffering, we don't know who else to blame. And our reasoning is that I am a child of God, I'm trying to live right. God is all powerful, therefore he can stop things. God is all loving, so he should care enough to do so. And yet this has happened in my life, and so I blame God. And I think a lot of people do that. And we can reason ourselves out of our faith. You know, faith is not faith if you understand everything about God. And so we walk by faith, not by sight. That means we live our life trusting in God that he has something better for us and that he has a plan in the providence of God. And so we don't have to understand everything. And that's where we go wrong, is we try to reason things out And C.S. Lewis actually said that that's one of the main reasons most people that lose their faith, that are Christians and lose their faith, they reason themselves out of their own faith, because that is the reasoning, like what I was going over a second ago. Yes. Wilma?
I have found in the past that when you're in a bad place, or if you can release it and say, I've done all I can do now, I put it on God's shoulders, I put it in His hands, and it gives you very, very much relief. And it also strengthens your faith.
So it gives you relief, strengthens your faith, kind of gives you a peace. What Wilma is saying, do everything that you can do. And people take different approaches. Some people will take the approach that they'll just sit back and think that God's supposed to do everything. And God wants us to do, He wants us to be faithful to Him, and He wants us to do the things that He expects us to do through His Word. And sometimes we don't do those, and we wonder why we're struggling. Well, we need to do our part. So Wilma was saying, do your part, and then you step back and say, God, please, I need your help. Rely on Him to handle the rest. Very good, Wilma. Anybody else? All right, there was the second thing of what suffering helps out with in our life that Dan brought out, and that is because it can help us to help other people. Y'all remember talking about that? And so the passage, of course, there is 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 and 4. Anytime that we've gone through something, especially if it's similar to what somebody else has gone through, then we can help that person in their suffering. And part of what that passage is saying, what's the main thing, the main way that we can help somebody going through that? It's not just relating. We talked about, relating with that person because we've been through something similar. But in the 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4 passage, what's the main thing that we're doing for them to help them get through that time? Do y'all remember we discussed it last week? We point to God, right?
Right.
We point them to God. So it's not just trying to be sympathetic, empathetic, and relating with them. That's all good, and that does help, but then we point them to God. Sometimes what we do is we just talk about our feelings and how we have gone through the same thing or something similar, and the things that maybe we did to help get through that difficult time, and all of those are very helpful things, but don't ever forget that the main thing is to let them know, listen, the main reason or way that I was able to get through this is relying on God. God helped me through this. Praying to Him, relying on Him, because He does. He's the one that helps us get through that. Anybody else on that before we go to our study starter questions?
Yeah, Mark, we have to be careful when we say, I know what you're going through. I felt what you're feeling. You don't know.
No,
so
don't
you have
ever
to
say
be
that.
careful. So you need to direct from you to God.
Right.
You want to deflect that and put it in God's hands, because everyone grieves differently. Everyone feels differently. Everyone handles situations in life differently. So, yeah, put the emphasis on God, not on you, that, you may have had to deal with the same thing, but it's totally different.
Right. Grief 101 will tell you, don't ever tell anybody, hey, I know exactly what you've been through, because you don't. Because you don't, maybe you lost a spouse, they've lost their spouse, but yet their spouse and your spouse are two different things. And maybe they had a different kind of relationship with their spouse. They might have even had a closer relationship with their spouse. That's just an example. So you don't ever say exactly. You can say, I've been through something similar, and let me try to help you out. Larry?
When we lost our daughter, people say, oh, I know how you feel. No. If you ain't never lost a child, if you ain't never done it, you don't know how you feel. I promise you.
No, I can't imagine. And it seemed like that was more common back then, and I think it's because of that, the way it made you feel. And I can remember my mama. My mama was one of the sweetest ladies I've ever known, and yet when she lost her husband, she had a lot of people that came through the line saying that thing, I know how you feel. And she said, I was so angry because I have no idea. And I think that happening over the years and years past a lot is what brought out, in trying to teach, helping people go through the grieving process, not to not do that. Right. Yeah. I can't imagine. I'm sorry, y'all have gone through that. I know that's something that you continue to go through, you know, in different stages in your life. Right. Anybody else? Let's go to study starter questions. Lesson 11, Forgiving God, number 2. This is, if you've got your book, we might read a little bit from it here in a little bit. 71 through 74 is where we'll be. Question number 1, could God keep you from hurting or from being hurt without using a miracle? What's your answer to that? I think it's a dumb question myself.
I do too.
Of course he could. He's God. I mean, God can do all things. And so, of course, he could do that even without doing a miracle. The passages that he cites is Genesis 18:14, and that is, of course, Abraham and Sarah and them doubting about having a child. And is anything too hard for the Lord is the passage there. And then he also cites Matthew 19:26, with God, all things are possible. And so, yes, I think that's common sense that God can help. But that leads us to, why doesn't he always help the way that we think that he should? And a good answer for this that I got from some of the reading is God's providence. That we do not know, of course, the providence of God. We don't know what lies ahead. We don't know. For instance, if we lost somebody that is so near and dear to us, we don't have any idea what might have happened. God can see ahead, obviously, and we don't know what could have happened to that person that God sees. You know, you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense at all? God knows all things. He knows the beginning, end, and everything in between. We have no idea what could have happened if that person would have continued to live. Might have gone through a tragedy worse than what actually took their life. I'm just using that as an example because death and losing someone, of course, it would be the number one. I think divorce would be a close second, depending on your marriage and everything, and you go from there. But I've been through that, and it's very hard to reason out why things happen, especially if you're faithful to God and you're trying your best, why things happen the way that you do. Faith is not faith if you understand everything. So the providence of God. Genesis 50, let's read that. Genesis chapter 50 speaks of the providence of God just a little bit in the account there of Joseph. You probably remember this passage, but it just kind of rings out like a bell when you think about the providence of God. You think about Joseph's situation and what all he went through. And he was, all indications a very, very good guy, and yet what all happened to him, the way his brothers treated him in a very scornful, hateful way, and he went into slavery and was put into prison for being wrongly accused and was supposed to be let out because of the promise, and then, of course, got forgot about, and on and on. You know the account of Joseph. Did I say Joseph or did I say somebody else? Okay. And so Genesis 50, 18 through 20. You remember what's finally going on here? Yeah, Joseph's father had died, and so his brothers had come, and finally the great revelation of who he is, and they're scared to death because of what they had done to him, and they think for sure, knowing what they had done to him, what he, with the power that he has, is going to do to them. And yet he responds in this way. Let's see, verse 18 through 20, Genesis 50. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, "Behold, we are your servants." I guess so. They're begging. And Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive." God knew that. God knew the famine was going to come. God knew that he was going to relocate them. Joseph did not know that. His brothers did not know that. And then he says, verse 20, "But as for you, you meant it as evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about as it is this day to save many people alive. Now, therefore, do not be afraid. We'll just stop right there. So you see the providence of God there in that passage and in that account a lot. That's something to keep in mind going through difficult times. Is Joseph in many situations like that? Just trust in God that he knows what is best. Romans 8:28 is a beautiful passage that speaks to that. All things working together for good. Anybody else on number 1? Anybody else think that was a dumb question? I saw that and I thought, really, Dan? I mean, because Dan's a smart guy and a great author, but anyway. Number 2 on our study starter questions, when God allows you to suffer, does that mean he doesn't care or that he really does care?
And he does care.
Well, how is that? I mean, if you care and you can do something about, if you're suffering and Paulette can do something about it and she doesn't, does that mean she cares?
No, it's a lot of difference between her and God.
You got that right.
God
That's a
knows
good
what's
answer.
best.
Exactly. God knows what's best. And so I wanted to read just a little bit before we play our video, if y'all want to be getting that video up and ready. But page 75 in your book, if you've got your book handy. If not, you can just listen to me. Dan talks about this. God is willing to let us hurt because he knows it's the secret to our happiness. Did y'all read that? The secret to our happiness doesn't make any sense. And he says, say what? And so he talks about, I don't want to believe that something wonderful can come from something awful, but still, if I'm going to believe the Bible, that's what it says. Here are 4 passages to consider, and 4 different things that he points out. Number 1, problems can help us stay focused on what is truly important, and he cites Romans 12 and verse 12. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. And so when you're going through difficult times, what do you do a whole lot of? Pray. What does prayer ultimately do?
Strengthens us.
It strengthens us. It brings us closer to God. Would anybody disagree with that? He continues there by saying right in the middle of that short verse, there's a challenge. We are to be patient in tribulation, or more literally, we are to be someone that continually remains under pressure. And that's what the Greek meaning of that word is, to remain under pressure. He says, I'm better. Now this is the 3rd paragraph down if you're reading along with me on 76. He says, I'm a better person when I hurt. That's hard to think about. I think more about heaven and the hope of peace. I spend more time in prayer, and I find myself looking for God in the smallest developments of the day. That's very good. So number 1, problems help us stay focused on what's truly important. Number 2, he brings out problems remind us of how blessed we are to have friends. Going through difficult times. Sometimes your friends will let you down, and that's one thing I was thinking about. But I think we probably all have had friends to help us out in difficult times, have we not?
Amen.
I mean, they might not know what to do or what to say, but the fact that they're there, that they're asking about us, maybe they've brought some food, maybe they call us, text us, whatever, that makes us feel good. We know that somebody cares and that they understand that we are going through a difficult time. So he brings that out. I like that. And I had not thought about that. Alma?
I have a hard time understanding how people deal with day-to-day life and not have a church family.
I do too.
Well, because the people in your church family and your spiritual family understand and relate to you on a level that other people cannot. That's me.
No, that's biblical. Romans 12 is verse 15, to rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. That denotes a close relationship. And a close relationship only comes through knowing, and knowing someone only comes through being around that person. And being around that person does not come from neglecting coming together and being together. And so it all points back at the importance of assembling and being together. And this is not just the only assembly. We know that. Just like Thursday, didn't we have a good time? Wilma, Susan. Man, we have a wonderful time. We have a blast. And we always say, whatever happens on the Golden Roadrunner trips, you know the rest of that. You know? But we have a good time. That's fellowship. You know, that is not more important than coming together and worshiping God. It's not as important as that. However, even the passages that talk about coming together to worship God has to do with stirring up one another to love and good works. It has that aspect of fellowship in with it. And so when we come together to do fun things like that, the fellowship meal in the back even, you get to know people that you wouldn't know otherwise. Believe it or not, I know this is hard to believe, that people actually hit that door running sometimes after worship. Can y'all believe that? Are y'all dead this morning? Can I get an amen?
Amen.
I mean, seriously, it is impossible to get to know people just right here, because they leave, and you got everybody circled around, lots of different conversations, but when you connect outside of here, one-on-one, that's wonderful. When we have opportunities to get together like the Roadrunners are back here, and you can sit and talk to someone, you will make a connection that you did not have before. You might say something that somebody needs to hear that's maybe going through a difficult time, and you have no idea. Somebody that might not feel like they have any friends, and yet you just made their day because you sat beside them and talked with them and showed that you cared about them. Is that not important? That's important. The Bible, teaches that it's important. So anyway, I thought that was a great comment that he made there. And then a third thing is problems help us work on our faith. And we've already really talked about that, so we're not going to go into that. And that's all I wanted to read from the book anyway. We've got a video. Anybody else want to say anything about number 2? The answer that Dan put, if you are filling that out, that he was looking for, is suffering can help us draw closer to God, which we've already discussed. So if we're ready, play the video.
When he was a boy, he got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to deliver newspapers. As he got older, he drove a truck, picked fruit, and hauled ice when he wasn't playing football. His name was Marion Michael. He was such a good athlete, he was awarded an athletic scholarship by the University of Southern California, USC. Unfortunately, he broke an ankle in his second year and stepped away from the sport. You and I know him because his 6'4" frame filled the big screen with more than 200 films to his credit. He died from complications due to cancer at the age of 72. He was an American icon, the Duke, John Wayne. That's right, Marion Michael Morrison changed his name to John Wayne. There are a lot of people in the Bible whose names were changed. Abram to Abraham, father of multitudes. Sarai to Sarah, princess, I like that. Simon Peter to the Rock, and of course, Saul to Paul. Today, as we stand in a cemetery, the example of a name change that comes to my mind is a lady in the Old Testament, Naomi. Where she lived, the local economy was awful, and her family was forced to pack up their home in Bethlehem and move to a foreign country, starting all over. That's where life added insult to injury. First, her husband of many years passed away. We don't know why. Did he get sick? Was there an accident? We just don't know. The Bible simply says Naomi's husband died, and she was left. Then both of her sons died. The Grim Reaper took away every member of her immediate family. She was left with 2 daughters-in-law, and one of them left her to fend for herself. Well, finally, she returned home to Bethlehem and said to her friends, "Don't call me Naomi." That name means pleasant. "Call me Mara," bitter. And she explained, "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." Ruth 1, verse 20. The years had been unkind, and her life had been scarred with sadness. How did she feel? Bitter. Who did she blame? God. The Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Ouch. That gets pretty close to home. Like Naomi, most all of us have been disappointed with life. Difficulties, disabilities, damages, divorce, disease, death, they can leave us in a need of repair, in a state of despair, feeling disturbed and perturbed, looking for someone to blame. I mean, we're in pain, and someone is to blame, right? What we usually do is point our thoughts in one of two directions. We either blame ourselves or we blame God. We ask, what have I done to deserve this? What we're really saying is, what's wrong with me? Or, what's going on? What's wrong with God? Think about those two questions a little bit more. First, when we hurt, we're tempted to blame ourselves and question our own goodness. We equate suffering with sin. Go back to the book of Job. That man lost everything he had. He lost every one of his children in the same natural disaster. Then of all things, he lost his health. Listen to what his friend Eliphaz said. "Who that was innocent ever perished? I have seen those who plow or plant iniquity, sow or reap trouble." Let me paraphrase that. When did good people ever have bad things happen to them? You're having trouble, Job, because you've transgressed. You're suffering because you're a sinner. Listen to what his friend Bildad said. "Does God pervert justice? If your children have sinned against Him, He has delivered them into the hand of their transgression. If you'll seek God and plead with the Almighty for mercy, He will restore your rightful habitation." Job 8, 3-6. Man, that was outright cold. Your children died because they weren't living right. And if you'd start living right, stuff like this wouldn't happen. Listen to what his friend Zophar said. "Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves." Job 11:6. Man, who needs friends like that? You may be hurting, but it's not half as much as what you deserve. If you suffer, you've sinned. That's what they were thinking. Remember how the apostles reacted to a man born blind? They asked Jesus, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" John 9, verse 2. If you suffer, you must have sinned, but that's not always true. Jesus learned obedience through what He suffered. Hebrews 5, verse 8. Our Lord suffered, but He never sinned. Sometimes we suffer as the consequence of something we've done, and to that extent, we are culpable. But going through bad times doesn't mean automatically we've done bad things. We shouldn't be too quick to blame ourselves. Well, instead of blaming self, when they suffer, some blame God and question God's goodness. For example, grief causes some to doubt God's existence. God, are you really there? In the words of Psalms 42, verse 10, others are asking, "Where is your God?" And they don't know how to answer. And then grief has caused others to doubt God's benevolence. God, do you really care? With David, they want to know, how long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? Psalms 13, verses 1 and 2. If God is there, why doesn't He do something to help me? If He doesn't do something, is He really there? Does He really care? That's the idea. Well, I've got a better idea. David wrote, you have tried my heart. You have visited me by night. You have tested me. I have purposed that my mouth will not transgress. Psalm 17, verse 3. Paraphrased. God has put me to a test and allowed stuff to happen, but I'm not going to say anything bad about Him. The rest of that psalm gives us some ideas on how to think that same way. We'll look at those a little bit later on. But right now, let's be encouraged by our memory verse again. Hebrews 12, verse 11. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who've been trained by it. Isn't that a great passage? Isn't that a great thought? Things are going to get better. Let your study leader help you with that a little more, and we'll see you one more time before we close our study.
All right, so we got about 4 minutes, so we're not going to get into the study harder. Hang on to that. We'll go over that next week. A couple of things in our frail attempt of trying to reason out bad things in our life. We oftentimes reason out the two things that he brought up, and it makes good sense. Well, why did this happen to me? Why am I going through a difficult time? Well, for one, we know that sin brings about consequences, right? And we're not talking about eternal consequences alone. I'm talking about here in this life, does it not? And so if we're going through difficult times and we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, then we reason out, as Job's friend, so-called friend did, that I must have done something wrong. Well, even though that is the case, that doesn't mean that this is where we go wrong. That doesn't mean that's the only reason why we suffer. Yes, we can suffer from the consequences of sin, but just because we're suffering does not mean that we have sinned, right? And we need to keep that in mind. What else? Was there any other point that y'all wanted to bring out about what Dan was saying?
Well, man's sin brought death. And death brings with it a lot of sorrow and stuff. And that's one of the things I stressed to this lady down the road down there. She said, God made me do it. I mean, God did this. And I said, no, we did it, you and I. She said, what are you talking about? I said, it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. We sinned and brought death into this life. And He doesn't tell us how death's going to happen. Your son was killed by hitting a slick place in the road. It wasn't God's fault. It was the fault of those who brought death into the world.
Right.
Human beings.
You got to be very, very careful about, and I'm sure you were, about how to bring that about to somebody that's actually going through a situation like that. But that is a fact that sin was brought into the world by us, and we live in a broken world now. So
she brought it up. That's the reason we were talking about it. I told us, well, I'd like to talk to you about this. You're thinking that God killed your son.
Right.
If you've lost a child, is it possible to lose a life? I still don't understand why it happened.
You'll never
And
stop trying to
anybody
figure
that
out.
it's never happened to will never understand the pain. It's not like losing a mother, a father, a brother, or sister. It's different.
I can't
And I'm
imagine.
sure it was different for me than it was Judy and them, because their relationship with their kid and me, but it's the worst ever.
One of the things we learned in the past, in past lessons, is it's okay to question God. It's not okay to reject God. It's okay to question God. Why in the world did this happen to me? And we've seen example after example after example, biblical examples of good, strong, faithful people that did that. And so what Melody is saying is like a loss of a child that she unfortunately has gone through. You never quit questioning, and that's okay.
And
That's
Mark,
okay.
one last point here. A lot of it is how it happens. You know, a car wreck or something instant. It's just a shock where somebody's been sick for a long period of time. You know it's coming.
Yeah.
They're getting near the end and all that. So it's different for everybody, but a lot of times it's the way it happens. So you have to consider all that.
Right. Well, thanks for your comments. Class is dismissed, and we'll pick up there next week. The study harder questions. Y'all hang on to those.